Darkest Hour special. I'm Rhianna Dhillon and I am delighted to be joined by the film's director, Joe Wright, and it stars Gary Oldman, Kristin Scott Thomas and Lily James. Thank you so much for joining me. Everyone, congratulations on The Darkest Hour. Joe, let's start with you. What was your motivation for making a film about Churchill?
Well, I read this screenplay and I laughed, and then I found myself wondering what was going to happen next, even though I knew the outcome. And then I cried a bit, and I found it to be kind of extraordinary portrait of a man at a crisis point in world history. And I wanted to do it. And then I wasn't sure whether, I wasn't sure until Gary came on board. And then I thought, well, Gary's the greatest actor in the world. I want the chance to work with Gary as well.
We've seen Churchill in quite a few guises, but never quite like this. How did you put your stamp on him?
Well, I think together, Gary and I saw a Churchill that was kind of different from how he'd been portrayed before. He's often portrayed as having been sort of born in a bad mood. And actually this Churchill was incredibly energised. He was sort of manic almost. His brain worked at 500 miles an hour, and everyone found it quite difficult to keep up with him. It's quite a kind of intimate portrait of him. We wanted to sort of explore the man behind the myth and see if we could relate to him.
Gary, how do you move away from the stereotype of Churchill and start to embody him yourself? Because this didn't feel like a stereotype watching
I think it's that you just, I just went back to the source. As Joe said, he's been represented over the years and played incredibly well by some very brilliant actors. But you have to sort of put all that noise to one side. And it was very much there on the page. It's Anthony that is looking for this portrait. So he has laid all the groundwork for you emotionally, where you travel in the story.
Anthony's the writer.
Yeah, Anthony McCartan, our screenwriter, and then I just went to some of the books written about Churchill, voluminous. There's hundreds of them. The speeches, certainly, all the famous speeches are recorded. I had an iPhone app. There's an app, a Churchill app, and it's all the speeches. And so you can travel with it, and I used to sort of put it in the car, and you can just click on, and they say, 1938, Churchill's speech. And I would just, sort of an immersion, and there's plenty of newsreel footage from the period. And as Joe said, the revelation to me was the energy of the man. That he had a dynamism and a sparkle, like a live wire, electric.
Well, like you say, there is so much source material. You're playing Clementine. She's like the real force behind Churchill. What kind of impact did you want to leave the audience with about her?
I just think it's really interesting to think about the women who share the lives of our important leaders. And I think that in Clemmy's case, she was very much part of the engine. She really, I wouldn't say she was behind him, I would say she was sort of next to him, with him. They communicated a great deal. They had a very tumultuous marriage. But what interested me in all of that is how is it domestically with someone as brilliant and extraordinary as Winston Churchill, and who was in the period that our film deals with, the situation that he's facing is so impossible. And I just thought, what interested me in that was how that woman deals with that, and does she step back? Does she step forward? What does she do? And so that's what we look at in the film.
Lily, your character Elizabeth is kind of like the heart and soul of the film almost. What did you enjoy about playing her?
Firstly, I enjoyed, well, my character's sort of based on a real woman, Elizabeth Leighton, and who wrote a book about her experiences working with Churchill throughout the Second World War. So I loved reading her book and seeing Churchill from her perspective and all his kind of mad sort of quirks and behaviour and the way she sort of withstood it and, was there as a sort of dedicated secretary for him and passionately sort of committed to him. And then for me, just to play someone that's working, that sort of has her own sort of mission in this is, towards the war effort. And then for me to be in these scenes with Gary, who is Churchill, it was kind of terrifyingly magnificent. And to share the scenes with Gary, and
it's fun.
It was really fun.
It looked so fun, like you giggling in a corridor together.
Yeah,
that felt really
scene.
sincere.
There was lots of sort of highs and lows, wasn't there? And their relationship, which in reality, developed over the course of 4 years of the war, but in our film sort of developed quicker. We sort of condensed it. But, the truth of that relationship was, I thought, really interesting and unexpected.
How important was it that we did see that more human side of Churchill, that vulnerable side?
Well, that's kind of the point of the film, really. We know Churchill as this great sort of bronze statue standing on top of a plinth in Parliament Square, surveying the world and the traffic. And the idea was to bring him down from that plinth and try and understand him as a human being, really, and as fully as possible in this very short space of time. Find the details, find what made him such an extraordinary leader, and that is about his relationship with all of those people around him who supported him.
I mean, my perspective of Churchill has completely changed since seeing the film, to be honest. Do you think...
What was your perspective of him before?
Well, like you say, this kind of very bolshy, brash, rude character, and then you see the more human side, you see the marriage, you see how he relates.
He didn't suffer fools lightly.
No.
I mean, he was really tough on people if they didn't live up to the standards that he thought the nation deserved. But when they did live up to those standards, he was kind and generous, and he was very funny as well. He used humour. He kept everyone going with humour. He worked harder than anyone else, and he expected everyone to work as hard as he was, And he made mistakes. He made lots of mistakes in his career. He was in Parliament for like 50 years, and during that time, there were some things he possibly got wrong, but at this point in time, he was the man who got it right.
Gary, Joe said that he was persuaded to come on to this after he realised that you were on board. What persuaded you to take on Churchill?
Well, we came... It was just a harmonic thing, I think we just came on at the same time. I loved the fact that it was only really that the script... I wasn't asked to play a life and age and, it was just a very specific and very defining window of time that I was being asked to play. And at the end of the day, it's always, people ask you, why do you do something? And you say, invariably, it's script and director. You respond to the material, and you want to know that the man in charge, the governor, knows what he's doing. And I had admired and respected Joe and his work. Met him before he was a filmmaker, I think, or a fledgling. Yes, many years ago.
Remember that encounter?
I do.
Yeah.
It's seared into my brain. I was 20 years old, I think. What year would it have been?
96.
I was 25. And my friend Kathy Burke, the actress, was in Gary's film Nil by Mouth, one of the greatest films of the 90s. And she took me to a screening, and I watched the film and was completely blown away by it. And then after the movie, she introduced me to Gary, and I was totally starstruck. And she said, Gary, this is my mate Joe. He's going to be a film director. And I was like, hello. And, hello, Mr. Oldman, like that. And that was it. Yeah. I think she might have even said one day he's going to direct you in a movie. And I was.
I've got a feeling that she did say that, and what better film, you know? So that was. I mean, I don't want to speak for my other thespians here, but would you say it's
Script and director.
Script and director?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite sure which order.
Well, Kristin, you said, I think in the past that you wanted to do something only if it was really irresistible. So what was so irresistible about Darkest Hour?
Irresistible. Come on. Come on, Kristin. Come on, the dames.
Come on the day.
Right, yeah. I think. Well, the script got it right. You know, they created a place where we could actually recognise a human being, not a shadow lurking in the background, but a woman who engaged with her husband, who engaged with the current events, who loved and looked after somebody who drove her insane, but that's what she'd chosen to do, and I feel that in our film there was space for me to sort of deliver that, to be able to make a Clemmy that makes sense.
Joe, there is so much of this film that struck me about being very isolating. You often think about wartime as sometimes bringing people together, but that isolation was something that really stood out. Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Well, I think, in the words of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and thanks, and the responsibility that Churchill shouldered at that time, I believe, must have isolated him. I think it's quite lonely up there, and frightening, really. And although he must have felt that fear, and so I tried to create a kind of visual language that expressed that by placing him in these kind of boxes, by kind of boxing him in constantly, creating this sense of claustrophobia. There's lots of kind of frame within a frame kind of compositions to try and express that isolation, which then at the end, and this is kind of the fulfillment of it, the idea that he was able to break out of that isolation and connect with the British public in a way that was deeply personal and become their voice. You know, I mean, that's the thing about great leadership, is that he became the voice of the people and expressed their sentiment, and sometimes expressed their sentiment that they didn't even know they had, you know. I think I love that quote where someone described him as being the British lion, and he said, "I'm not the lion, I'm the lion's roar." The idea that the British people were the lion, and he was there to be of service, to be their voice. You know, it's a film. A lot of the film's about language and about the power of language, the power of words to change and shape history, and that's what he did.
Tell me a bit more about, I know you've touched on this already, but about, you know, the research that you had to do, because there is just so much. How do you sort of be like, actually, I need to leave that there now and stop?
It's just when you fall asleep, basically. You just, you know, there's so much. Churchill himself wrote more words than Shakespeare. It's impossible to read everything about Churchill, so you just read as much as you can, and at a certain point you have to put the book down and start work.
I think Rehearsal.
Yeah,
Really, by the time we got to Rehearsal, which is rare and unheard of, I mean, to work on a film and have 4 weeks rehearsal is, you know, you say that to a producer, they twitch and spasm, you know. So God bless them for giving Joe and us the time to physicalise it and vocalise it before we got there. But I think Joe's, I remember, at least I might have it wrong, but you know, it has to become a creation in the end and not an impersonation. For all of us. And I think by the time we got to Rehearsal, it was Joe who just said, really, we put all of that away. We've done the research, we've done the work, and now this is what is in front of us. This is the story we're telling. We're telling it with these words, and so it's you know, there just comes a point when you have to. And sometimes you need an actor needs a director to say, stop. We're working with this now.
You also try and set people kind of practical tasks as well, so that it takes them out of their head. Yeah. Like when we did Anna Karenina, it was all about learning the dancing. With this movie, Lily learned to touch type.
I was going to ask you about this.
She literally learned to type.
Insane.
She had this wonderful tutor who would come every day.
You had pink hair at one point.
It's called touch typing, isn't it?
Touch typing,
And she would just like be obsessively like.
I was obsessed.
She was so obsessed with her touch typing. It was like she felt that if she learned how to type, everything would be okay.
I was frightened at one point. I got too fast that it looked like I was doing it like it was fake, and it wasn't.
It was really amazing. Like she got these really muscly fingers as well that were just like hammering away at this 19.
We had a rehearsal room about the size of this room, and
I'm so sorry. It must be so
and then there was and then in any break that we had, you would go off for a cup of tea or something and come back and there was Lily alone.
Really hard.
It's not like it's not like a laptop where you can just like lightly touch it.
Well, you say that. Churchill says that. Be quiet.
There's another bit where you say, it does sound like gun. It's like it's so loud that it does feel like you're going slowly insane.
Well, it used to. We had a moment in the script and these things. You can't put everything in. But he did, in fact, have silent typewriters because of that very thing, because it was just so distracting and it was so loud that he couldn't think.
So Lily was just annoying everybody on set with this.
Not annoying everyone. I was just worried for her sanity because it was a bit obsessive. Like OCD.
Tear her away from the...
It's like, Lily, it's okay. Don't worry, darling. We can, you know what I mean?
You're not actually going to see what you're writing. I could have been writing like bread and butter.
No, but it's wrong. It's wrong, Joe. She'd say, look, I got the T right. The T's... It's all right,
so
love.
self-obsessive. But you imagine down in the war rooms with all those typing pools with all these women. It must have sent people insane.
Yeah. Lily, you've spoken about the shock of seeing Gary on set as Churchill. Was it really intimidating?
Well, we were saying the first time we saw him was in rehearsals, and all of us were just sort of like stunned. Like, there's a picture of me which is caught where I'm like this, like literally, like I can't believe it. It was so...
People sort of rose to their feet in respect. It was very...
Was that the first time you'd commanded that much?
Well, because but by the nature of it, meant that I came in early and was really ready by the time the other cast arrived for rehearsal. And we were at Ealing Studios, and there's at the end of the corridor, there are two main sort of stage doors, and you would go with either one or the other depending on what side of the room or what side of the set you were on. And I had, they very kindly gave me dressing room number 1.
Quite right.
And quite right. And I would come out of the room in the morning to go to the set, and all the background artists and day players and people that would come in with secretaries, soldiers, you know, the staff, office workers, they were lining the corridor on these benches where it was like a holding, it was a holding room, but basically it was a corridor. And I would come out and walk past them all to the set, and they would, all the soldiers would all straighten up and they would salute, and the secretaries were all like, "Oh God, this is Mr. Churchill." So it was interesting reaction of
prepares you for the scene, though. Prepares you for the role as well.
It was, yeah.
Because then you don't have to play the authority. The authority is given to you.
Yeah. That was that great note. I remember you gave Ben. About
Ben.
The,
yeah. Ben, who played the king, and he kept on, every time someone bowed at him, he would bow back. And I was like, there's something wrong with this. And then I suddenly realised one day, the king doesn't bow back. The king's job is to accept the bow. And once Ben started accepting bows rather than, feeling like he had to bow back, then we were in good shape.
See, it's a great piece of direction, that. Sometimes you read these books about, or I have in the past, you read a book about a director or a famous director or a famous actor, or they talk about, and you read, Stella Adler and Jutta Hagen and all these things that you should do or shouldn't do. And then you work with people, and a director may just come up and say, it's very good, but there's a little more at stake. It's a bit more at stake. And that's your note. That's a terrific note. Yeah. And to see that and then just say to an actor, you don't bow, you accept it, that can change. That adjustment.
That changed something in your
Yeah,
mindset.
and it can be the key, and it's the combination to the lock,
Joe, you've talked about Gary as being a shapeshifter before, which I absolutely agree with because you're different in every single film. But we wanted to ask you about which outstanding cinematic transformations have captured your imaginations. Lily, let's start with you.
Well, we were just talking about Charlize Theron in Monster. Yeah. But I actually want to change it now to True Romance, you and True Romance. Me and True Romance. Because that is, one of my favourite films, and Gary in that, Drexel. Whoa. It's just phenomenal. And it's I love those. They're some of my favourite scenes. That's a transformation. I mean, Jesus.
Absolutely.
And especially from Churchill. I mean, you couldn't have two more polar opposite peoples, human, in every respect, every single, physically, spiritually, mentally, everything. It's... Yeah.
That's a really good pick, actually.
Yeah.
Kristin?
Well, I have to say, I think Marion Cotillard in La Vie en Rose was amazing.
Absolutely.
And also, you're really good at saying her name.
I can say Marion Cotillard, and everyone will fall over.
Yeah. That was impressive.
Yeah.
Almost as impressive as her.
I mean, that was pretty spectacular.
It was. when I was growing up, I really loved Alec Guinness. And so there was a movie called Kind Hearts and Coronets where he played, I can't remember how many different characters. And he played an entire kind of line of a family. And I just thought this was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen. He was really one of my all-time favourites. I also really liked, completely different, Kate Blanchett in I'm Not There, when she played Bob Dylan. I thought that was kind of a shape-shifting performance. I couldn't believe that she had somehow encapsulated this figure, and that she moved beyond gender even. I thought that was incredible.
Tilda Swinton does that also very well in Orlando. That was
absolutely,
quite mesmerising.
absolutely, yeah.
Gary, what about you? Do you have a favourite?
Yeah, I think I'd have to say Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. I mean, you just have to admire the sheer commitment to the work. I remember seeing a matinee performance of it in the West End up here when I was younger, when it first came out. And I was so staggered by the photography and the direction and the performance and performances that I came out and bought a ticket for the evening performance and then had to sandwich somewhere and went back and watched it. So I watched it back to back twice in one day. That is, in terms of just the, as I say, a commitment to the work. It is the Holy Grail, I think. But I'm a great fan of, but I don't necessarily, I like Paul Newman. I like Robert Redford. I like Gary Cooper. Where it's like a different head inside, and it's the eyes. It's the eyes and not all the the fireworks.
Charles Lawton as well.
Oh yeah.
Charles Lawton was another hero of mine when I was growing up, and his Hunchback was a life changer.
There's a story about is it Spartacus? Yeah. And there's a story that is told about Peter Ustinov used to tell the story and was asked what it was like working on the set of Spartacus, because there was Charles Lawton and Laurence Olivier, and he said it was like the two of them were in a sports car, and Olivier was out in front, but he was looking in the mirror at Charles Lawton, who was mouthing, "I can overtake you at any time I want."
That is fantastic. You can imagine that as well, can't you? How is it acting with all those prosthetics on? I mean, that's an incredible feat, surely.
It's like a cross-your-heart bra. I forgot I was wearing it. I have it on. Perfect, look. No, it's like a synthetic skin. I mean, it moves and doesn't. It gets a bit.
We all kind of forgot he was wearing it as well.
Completely forget you were wearing it. And I think that was so important for all of us, because we had to believe him. The moment we could see the commitment that Gary, I mean, this happened within seconds, the commitment that Gary had brought to the room and how he was able to embody this man. You thought, oh, right then, well, I'm going for it. I'm going to be Clemmy. He's being Winston. I'm going to be Clemmy. And you just believed it, didn't you? And you didn't have that absolute terror of him suddenly whipping off the mask and saying, oh, I got you there. You didn't have that at all. It was just total faith and trust.
And I sort of forgot what Gary looked like. It's sort of now, sitting here with you now, it became so the norm, and it was so a real person that it's kind of...
Well, we would go into the bunker, as it were, and it was so immersive the set down in the war room. I mean, Sarah Greenwood, I mean, there were things you didn't see. There were, like, down to pins and paper clips that she got. And you would open a drawer and there would be things in the drawer, you know, so that the whole atmosphere was so immersive that, to be very honest with you, it you know, the other way round, you were Elizabeth. You weren't Lily. You know, we would get into this space. And
but not in a kind of indulgent sort of I never get out of character, don't call me Gary, you know. It was just a kind of, everyone was invested and committed to the work, and you were there, you know. And
I'd like to be called Vicky on the set.
With his bra.
One of my favourites was when we used to play music on set, you know, and one of my favourites was Gary twerking to Major Lazer, Bubble Butt as Winston Churchill. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Please tell me you have videos of that.
I do.
Can we see them one day? I need to
And,
do this.
maybe.
and your warming up of the Parliament with all the on the last day with where it was packed to the rafters, and Joe would come out sort of like one of those warm-up comedians, you know, that were kind of like he would come to the dressing room and say, "Well, I'm going out there. I'm gonna warm them up for you," and the Hey Jude thing is
whole of the Parliament.
We played music, and we played and on the last morning, as nearly said Churchill, Gary was about to give the Fight Them on the Beaches speech, and I played very loud. I played Hey Jude, and 600 men started, you know, putting their hands in the air and singing along to Hey Jude, and it was this incredible chorus. Yeah, it was really beautiful, and it created a kind of an emotion, a kind of wave of goodwill almost that supported Gary at that moment, you know, and that those supporting artists are really vital to the guy who's going to be, you know, holding the baton.
It was shaking the walls. You'd come into the studio, obviously they're soundproof, but the moment that you came in,
I've got a video of it, actually.
yeah,
I'm going to look at all these videos.
The whole experience of shooting that scene was just... because I was right up in the rafters and the gods watching, and it was just... How many days did we do that for?
That scene,
2.
we were in there for 3 days.
Yeah.
It was 1 day per speech, basically.
It was a really magnificent scene to watch.
And trust me, to be there, it was like...
Yeah, I bet.
very special.
What a note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me. That was really fabulous. And Darkest Hour is available to pre-order on iTunes now. Wow. Great.
Really?